I should have known something was wrong when no one looked me in the eye. The dining room was immaculate, as always, long oak table polished to a shine. My stepmother's antique crystal glasses catching the late-day sun like they were auditioning. For a magazine spread, the chandelier above cast its golden glow on an arrangement of hydrangeas and carnations. I knew she hadn't chosen for me. I hate carnations, always have. Happy 40th, someone mumbled. It might have been my younger brother. I didn't bother to check. My father was already halfway through his second glass of scotch, swirling it like a man pretending to appreciate the burn. I took my seat, the one near the end, closest to the kitchen, farthest from him. Like always, they passed the salad around. Roasted chicken, too. Conversation never rose above polite weather updates and muttered work complaints. No balloons. No candles. No music. Just the sharp sound of cutlery and the underlying hum of tension that had become the background noise. Of my life, I forced a smile. I always did. I wore my mother's gold pendant that night, a tiny heart-shaped locket that still held the photo of us from when I was 12. It was the only part of her left in this house. No one noticed it, but I felt it like armor pressed against my collarbone. About halfway through the meal, after my stepmother poured her second glass of wine, my father leaned forward. "You know," he said, setting down his knife too loudly. "Some people your age already have families. A husband, a real job." The table went quiet. I kept chewing. I knew better than to engage. I'd heard versions of this speech my entire life. A woman was meant to follow the plan. Marriage by 30, kids by 35, smile smaller, speak softer. He cleared his throat. "I mean, for God's sake, you're still living in that one-bedroom condo. Above a nail salon? I paid for 4 years of your education and your what-flipping houses, still playing pretend?" That did it. My fork hit the plate, louder than I intended. My heart started to pound. "I bought those houses, and sold them at a profit." "It's not pretend, Dad. It's real," he scoffed. "Don't talk to me about business. You wouldn't have a dime if it weren't for me." "No," I said softly. "I wouldn't have anxiety attacks or ulcers either." His face darkened. He stood. "You ungrateful little." His voice cracked with something between rage and disbelief. "You think you're better than this family? Look at you alone. Broke. Pathetic." I could feel it coming. That hot flush behind my ears. The pulse in my throat. And still, no one said a word. My stepmother reached for her wine again. My sister picked at her cuticles. My brother suddenly found the floor fascinating, and then, like he had rehearsed it, my father pointed a shaking hand at me and said, "You're nothing to me. You were always a burden. Get out of my house." Time slowed. The silence was a vacuum. Somewhere, the cake sat melting on the counter, chocolate ganache bleeding into the plate like a wound. I stood up. My heels echoed as I stepped back from the table. My voice, when it came, was calm, colder than I expected. "You'll remember this moment one day," I told him, "and it won't be with pride." He flinched, just slightly. I walked out with my spine straight and my mother's necklace burning like fire against my skin. Outside, the evening was crisp. I breathed it in like I hadn't tasted air in years. I didn't cry until I reached the car. Even then, it wasn't sobbing, just a steady, quiet unraveling as I stared at the windshield. The same one I'd sat behind for years, waiting for someone to see me. They never had. I drove home in silence. The kind that rings in your ears. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat cross-legged on my bed, the locket open in my palm, and stared at that photo until my eyes blurred. I thought about everything I'd swallowed over the years. The comments, the dismissals, the erasure. How they used my silence as proof that I was fine. But I wasn't fine. And I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. By morning, the sun crawled across the bedroom wall like a spotlight, and something inside me shifted. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving the story they wrote me into. There's a strange silence that follows grief, not the loud kind that comes with funerals and casseroles and whispered condolences, but the quiet hum that settles into your bones when the world forgets someone you loved. When Mom died, I was 19. 1 minute, I was sitting cross-legged on her bed helping her fold scarves. And the next, I was signing her hospice papers with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Cancer is greedy like that. It takes everything. Her scent. From the pillows, her laughter from the kitchen, the warmth from every corner of the house. My brothers were already gone. Off to college, off to lives they couldn't wait to start. I stayed. Someone had to. Someone had to cook dinner and do the laundry and remember to call the pharmacy. Someone had to sit across from Dad in that big, echoing house and pretend like things might be okay again. And it was always me. I didn't even ask. I just became what was needed. Quiet, efficient, invisible. My father unraveled in his own way. He stopped saying good morning, stopped looking me in the eye. He drank more, stayed longer at work, forgot birthdays, stopped asking how I was. Doing probably because he never wanted to hear the answer. And then, 5 months after we buried her, he remarried. No warning, no discussion. Just a dinner invitation, and suddenly I was sitting across from a woman with glossy blonde hair and a laugh too loud for the room. She wore diamond studs and talked about spa treatments. She called me sweetheart through clenched teeth and never once asked what I wanted. She was 28, 2 years younger than my oldest brother. From the moment she stepped into our lives, the house no longer felt like mine. She redecorated everything, took down Mom's framed embroidery in the hallway, replaced the dining room curtains with heavy imported silk, tossed out the rose-scented soaps, and filled the bathroom with designer perfume that gave me a headache. Even the china changed, but what hurt the most was how easily my father let her do it. It was like Mom had never existed, like I was just the help. She didn't yell, she didn't need to. Her weapon was exclusion, quiet little cuts that bled. Over time, she'd plan trips and leave me out of the group chats. She'd smile when my father mocked my career. She'd organize family photos and position herself dead center, leaving me on the edge like a footnote. I became the daughter who stayed, the one who cooked when she was too tired, who organized the books when Dad forgot to file taxes, who sat alone in the back pew at their vow renewal, clutching a bouquet I wasn't asked to hold. For years, I worked jobs that didn't ask too many questions. I answered phones at real estate offices during the day and took classes at night. My classmates thought I was driven. I was just desperate to build a life that couldn't be taken away. One summer, I took an internship with a woman named Maribel, a real estate investor who ran her business like a war strategy. She had no children, no husband, and wore her independence like armor. She taught me how to spot undervalued property, how to negotiate like a killer, how to hide your power until you're ready to strike. I watched, I learned. I saved. By the time I was 30, I had opened my first investment account, quietly, carefully, under a registered LLC that bore no trace of my name. I bought a small duplex in Jacksonville, renovated it with weekend sweat and grit, and sold it for 3 times what I paid. Then another, then 3 more. Every dollar I earned, I tucked away not just in banks, but in buildings, land, leases, silence, because the truth is, I knew I always knew this day would come, that one day he'd throw me out, like a guest who overstayed her welcome. I just didn't expect it to hurt the way it did, because despite everything, the insults, the cold shoulders, the years of being treated like an unpaid maid, there was still a part of me that hoped I mattered, that one day he'd look at me and see the woman I had become, that he'd remember the girl who held his hand at the cemetery, who ironed his shirts and covered for his hangovers and tried even when no one else did. That fantasy shattered on my birthday, and as I sat in my little condo the morning after, the humiliation with sunlight pooling through the blinds and the locket around my neck still warm from my skin, I felt something new rise inside me. Not just pain, clarity. They had underestimated me for so long, I had almost believed them, almost convinced myself I was small, insignificant, a footnote in someone else's story. But I wasn't. I was the author, and I was about to rewrite everything. Denial is a warm, numbing thing. It lets you believe that maybe, just maybe, people don't mean the awful things they say when they're angry or drunk, or both. It lets you hope that the weight of a shared past might soften the sting of a cruel word. For 2 days after my birthday, I clung to that denial like a fraying rope. I convinced myself that it was just a scene, that my father, blustering and sharp-tongued as ever, would come to his senses, that the next day, maybe even the next hour, he'd call, that someone, anyone would. But silence is a stubborn thing. It seeps in, it settles, it tells you truths no one else dares to say. When I returned to the house to collect my things, the silence was deafening. I pulled into the driveway slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my tires like bones. My childhood home stood tall and indifferent, the curtains drawn, the porch light off a house that used to hum with the familiar, but now looked like a stranger. My key didn't fit. I tried again, jiggled the knob, nothing. And then I saw it. My suitcase, the soft brown leather one I'd used since college, sitting by the door like a loyal dog that had been kicked out with me. On top of it was a crisp envelope sealed with a floral sticker. Inside was a note. 4 words written in the looping artificial script of my stepmother. She's finally out. The smiley face at the end, that was the bullet to the chest. I didn't cry. Not then. I picked up the suitcase, walked it back to the car like I was returning from vacation, not exile. My legs moved on their own, numb, detached, robotic. But inside, I felt hollow. They didn't just kick me out. They erased me that night. I checked into a cheap motel off the highway. Room 109, stale air, bleach-scrubbed tiles, a flickering fluorescent light above the vanity. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the muted floral bedspread, clutching the pendant around my neck like a lifeline. For 2 days, I barely moved. I scrolled aimlessly, watched bad television, listened to the low hum of air conditioning, and wondered if anyone would even notice. If I disappeared, my phone stayed silent. No missed calls, no texts. Just the occasional junk message from my phone carrier and a 20% off coupon from a department store I hadn't visited in years. I wasn't family. I was a placeholder. A placeholder no one needed anymore. The second night, I cried into the cheap, scratchy pillow until my throat hurt. My sobs were soft at first, then guttural, then silent again. The kind of grief that doesn't make noise because it's too old, too familiar. But somewhere, in the middle of that darkness, a thought floated up. They never saw you. And maybe they never would. That realization was colder than anything my father had ever said, because it meant all those years, all those thankless days and swallowed words and bent over backwards apologies, had been for people who never planned to love me back. At some point, just before dawn, I pulled my tablet from my bag. It was instinctual, the same way you reach for a light switch in the dark. I needed something solid, something mine. I opened my secure folder, typed in the passcode I hadn't shared with anyone, not even my accountant. My hands trembled. There it was, the portfolio. 5 years' worth of work. Every property, every transaction, every spreadsheet I'd meticulously kept. I clicked into my most recent dashboard. 4 properties had closed in the last month. Clean. High return flips I'd purchased under my silent LLC. I had always kept the numbers out of sight. I told myself I wasn't ready to look, but that night I looked, and I counted the net balance. In my primary business account was just over $11.2 million. The full value of my real estate holdings, across 4 states, aftermarket appreciation and tax deferrals, $45.3 million. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not out of pride, but disbelief. For so long, I'd let their voices define me. A disappointment, a failure, just a girl with ideas. They didn't know I was quietly building an empire. In my spare time, with nothing but grit and spreadsheets and YouTube tutorials, I was invisible to them. But not to the world, and not to myself. For the first time in months, I stood and walked to the bathroom mirror. My eyes were swollen, my skin pale, but behind all that, there she was, the woman who stayed, the woman who endured, and the woman who built something they couldn't take. I whispered it, not as a mantra, but as a vow. You're not nothing. The words felt foreign at first, like putting on an old coat you forgot you owned. You were never nothing. My reflection didn't flinch, and I swore then, not for revenge, not for spectacle, but for my own sanity, that I'd never again ask for love from those who traded in control. I would stop trying to be seen. Instead, I would stand where no one could look away. I booked the ticket the next morning one way. No return. Florida had always been a dream in the back of my mind. Not the tourist-packed beaches or neon-lit clubs, but the quieter side. The old homes with creaking shutters, the scent of salt and orange blossoms, the kind of heat that softened even the sharpest memories. The villa had been bookmarked on my laptop for months. A guilty indulgence during late nights between spreadsheets and tax filings. I'd stare at the photos and imagine another version of myself. A version who wore linen, who read paperbacks on a sun-drenched terrace, who didn't flinch when someone raised their voice. I bought it sight unseen. A wire transfer. One signature. And just like that, I was the owner of a modern villa perched along the curved coastline of Biscayne Bay. Floor-to-ceiling glass, marble, everything. A spiral staircase I had no need for but loved anyway. It looked like something out of a magazine. Cold, beautiful, and waiting to be lived in. I arrived with one suitcase and no plan. The driver who dropped me off tried to hide his curiosity as I stepped out in my wrinkled jeans and oversized cardigan, dragging a beat-up suitcase across the manicured stone path like a ghost with baggage. The first thing I did was open every single window. The sea air rushed in like a baptism, heavy with salt, threaded with jasmine, and loud with the sound of waves hitting the dock behind the house. That night, I sat barefoot on the terrace, my legs tucked beneath me, a glass of wine in hand. I stared out over the water as the sky folded into violet. The breeze played with the hem of my sleeve, and for the first time in years I felt nothing. Not grief, not panic, not guilt, just silence. And it wasn't the dead kind. It was clean, sacred, a blank page. The next few days blurred into one another like watercolors bled into each other. I moved from room to room like I was learning the house's language. The echo of my footsteps was unfamiliar, but it didn't scare me. I hung no photos. Lit no candles. It was just me, the glass walls, and the sea dot at night. I'd sleep on top of the covers, the windows cracked open, letting the wind move through me like something being cleared out. I'd wake early, walk the beach, and let my footprints be temporary. I started painting again, badly at first. Just watercolors on cheap paper I picked up from a supply store in Coconut Grove. I painted palms, abstract women with strong shoulders, silhouettes standing alone in rooms with golden light pouring through, imaginary windows. There was no plan, no purpose. Just color, just motion, just me. I found a local women's shelter and asked if they needed help. They did, always. But I asked them to leave my name off the volunteer board. I didn't want to be someone's daughter, someone's old assistant, someone's charity case. I just wanted to be useful, so I organized resume clinics, helped draft grant letters, showed a young mother how to use Excel. I listened more than I spoke. They didn't know my story and I didn't need to explain it. Pain recognizes pain, but healing recognizes effort. At the shelter, I met women who had been through far worse, who had been bruised in ways you could see and in ways you couldn't. And yet they laughed, they hugged, they danced when no one was watching. I watched them with AEW at home. I started cooking for myself. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I baked lemon shortbread one afternoon and ate it warm from the oven with no one watching. The scent reminded me of my mother, not in a sad way, but in a way that stitched something back together inside me. I wore red lipstick again. Not every day, just when I felt like it. The first time I saw myself with it on in the mirror, I blinked. It had been so long. My father used to say red lips made a woman look too loud. I smiled at my reflection that day. I wanted to be loud. Even the way I stood changed. I didn't shrink in doorways anymore. I didn't say sorry. When someone brushed past me in a grocery aisle, I stopped flinching when the doorbell rang, because I had nothing to fear. No one here expected anything from me but presence. One evening, I found myself sitting on the back dock, my legs dangling over the edge, watching the lights from the neighboring properties shimmer like little truths waiting to be spoken. I reached into my robe pocket and pulled out the locket. My mother's face smiled up at me, captured forever in a sepia photo that had faded around the edges. I touched it gently. "I'm okay," I whispered. "I think I'm finally okay." The truth was, I was still grieving, not just her, but the version of myself I'd buried to survive. But here, by the water, I began to believe there was a future not built from someone else's scraps, but from my own blueprints, my own hands, my own voice. I wasn't running anymore. I was becoming. There's something strange about healing. It doesn't arrive like a sunrise, sudden and warm and undeniable. It comes in fragments, like broken glass glinting at your feet. Small pieces of clarity that, if you pay attention, start reflecting the woman you've become. In Florida, I began to gather those pieces. I started slow. Each morning after my walk along the bay, I'd sit at the wide glass dining table and open my laptop, not to dream, but to remember. I combed through years of emails, invoices, financial records, every unpaid hour I worked for my father's company, every marketing plan he passed off as his own, every client I landed that he credited to luck or his name. At first, it felt like picking at old wounds, but soon it became something else, a kind of reckoning. I hadn't realized how much I'd buried, not just the work, but the gaslighting, the casual dismissal, the subtle emotional theft that crept in like fog, dulling everything until I couldn't tell where he ended and I began. I printed what I needed, highlighted what mattered, scanned everything else. I called a lawyer in Miami, a woman named Teresa, who didn't flinch when I told her who my father was. "Let's make this clean," she said. "Precise. You don't need vengeance, you need leverage." She was right. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I just wanted the truth to stop hiding. It was during that time that I made another decision, up. Until then, I had operated my real estate company behind the name GL Holdings, the initials of my mother's maiden name. It kept me safe. Anonymous, invisible, but invisibility was no longer my goal, so I logged into the Florida Splezek Public Business Registry and amended the Articles of Incorporation. I updated the contact name, and then with a few typed lines and a deep breath, I entered my full name first, middle, last, and hit submit. I signed it with my name, and with that, I erased the final ghost of who I used to be. The next day, I had my assistant file for a trademark under my initials, not for protection, but for presence. If someone Googled me, they'd find a woman who built her wealth with grit and spreadsheets, not handouts and inheritance. That weekend, I visited the shelter again. I had been volunteering for months, helping women build resumes, coaching them through job interviews, connecting them with local businesses open to second chances. But this time, I sat them down and told them the full story. I didn't hide behind metaphors. I told them how I was raised to be quiet, how I was taught to believed that service was love. How I stayed too long in a house that saw me as furniture. They listened, some with tears, some with fire in their eyes. I told them how I started my company with $800 and a secondhand laptop. How I worked weekends in exchange for spreadsheet software. How I made mistakes, learned late, but kept going anyway. Then I showed them my portfolio and their eyes widened. I don't tell you this to brag, I said. I tell you because they will try to convince you that your worth lives in your last mistake. But they're wrong. Your worth lives in every morning you choose to keep going. I gave them tools literally, laptops, budgeting templates, shared contact lists. I connected to women, to a grant writer I'd worked with. I set up a scholarship in my mother's name for vocational training. That night, I came home to an email. It was from my younger brother, the one who had barely spoken to me since the birthday disaster. His message was short, almost clinical. Dads. Business is falling apart. IRS audit. 3 former clients suing for fraud. I don't know what to do. I read it twice. The old me would have responded, would have called, would have offered help, even if I wasn't welcome at the dinner table. But the woman sitting in that villa, feet tucked beneath her on a leather sofa, red lipstick smudged from wine, didn't move. Because here's what he didn't say. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. He didn't mention the note on my suitcase. He just wanted rescue again. I closed the laptop on instead. I opened my notes app and began writing. It started as a list of lessons. Then it became an essay. Then it turned into something else, a manifesto about legacy, about money, about how women are taught to wait for inheritance, for permission, for a man to open the door. I titled it, Inheritance is Not the Only Way to Build a Legacy. I wrote through the night, cried at parts, laughed at others. I included the moment I stood outside that house, suitcase in hand, with a note that said, "She's finally out." I wrote about what it taught me, that being cast out was, ironically, the first time I was set free. I didn't use metaphors. I used names, my name, and when I was done, I submitted it to She Owns It Journal, a publication for women entrepreneurs. I didn't expect them to publish it. I just wanted to say it out loud. They replied in 4 hours. Not only did they publish it, they featured it on their homepage with a photo of me standing in front of the villa, arms crossed, head tilted. In defiance, my curls were wind-tossed. My lipstick was red. They titled the feature From Castaway to CEO, How One Woman Turned Her Exile into a $45 million empire. Within a day, it went viral. Emails poured in, DMS comments, women thanking me, strangers sharing their own stories, men asking how to do better. I even received a message from Maribel, the investor who mentored me a decade earlier. I knew you had it in you. You did what most of us only dream of. You stopped apologizing, and that's what this part of the journey was about. Not revenge, not mendication, but refusal. Refusal to shrink, to vanish, to stay quiet in rooms where my voice had earned its place. They tried to build an empire on my silence. I built mine on the noise they left behind. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of quiet, sun-warmed morning where everything feels suspended in amber. I had just come back from the market, arms full of fresh lavender and a sourdough loaf still warm through the paper, when the alert pinged on my phone. Villa, entry camera. Motion detected. I tapped the screen absent-mindedly, expecting to see the gardener or maybe a delivery van backing out of the drive. But it wasn't either of those. It was him standing at the rot. Iron gate. My father. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not just in size, but in presence. The kind of deflated figure you pass on the street without noticing. His hair had gone grayer. What little remained of it, his shoulders once squared like a man who believed the world owed him something, now slumped forward as if the world had finally collected its debt. I stood there in the hallway, groceries forgotten in my arms, staring at the screen. The wind outside rustled the palms. My heart didn't race. My throat didn't tighten. I just watched. Eventually, I set the bag down, adjusted my cardigan, and slipped on my sandals. I met him at the gate, not inside, not on the porch, not even on the driveway, at the boundary, because that was all I was willing to give. He looked up when he saw me for a second. His mouth twitched like he didn't know what expression to wear. Regret, relief, shame. He settled on something between confusion and need. "Hi," he said. I said nothing. He cleared his throat. "You look well." I let the silence settle. He squirmed beneath it, like always. I didn't know where else to go. "I got your address from your brother. Hope that's okay." It wasn't, but I nodded once, stiffly, to move things along. He started talking fast, the way he always did. When he felt like time was slipping away from him, the business fell apart. Between the lawsuits, the audit, I made some bad decisions. Trusted the wrong people. I arched an eyebrow. The wrong people. That was rich. And she's gone, he added, voice dropping. Took everything she could. Turns out she was seeing some guy in his 20s for months. He works at the gym. He almost laughed at that, like it was a joke we could share. I didn't laugh. I've had to move out of the house, he said. Staying in a motel now, just for now, of course. I watched him fumble with his words with his own shame. I watched the man who once towered over me like a verdict, now wither beneath the weight of his own actions. Then he looked up again, and for the first time I saw it. The thing I had once begged for in silence. Recognition. I was wrong. He said, I was cruel to you. I let her treat you like garbage. I didn't stop it. I didn't defend you. And that night, your birthday, I said things I can't take back. My throat was dry, but I didn't speak. I need some help, he whispered. Just alone. Something to get me on my feet. I've got a few ideas. I need to get back in the game. There it was. Not an apology, a request, a plea, a business pitch, disguised as remorse. I took a slow breath and opened my purse. He watched with that flicker of hope people wear when they think they're about to be saved. But I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a folded note, yellowed at the corners, creased perfectly down the center. I handed it to him. He opened it slowly. He read the 4 words, she's finally out. He stared at it, frozen, his mouth opened. Then, closed again? You remember this? I asked quietly. Your wife wrote it? Left it on top of my suitcase the day you changed the locks. He said nothing. I kept it. I added, because it was the last thing you gave me, the last message you ever sent me. His face shifted then, not to sorrow, not to fury, but to something far worse. Understanding, I leaned in, just slightly. Just enough. You told me I was nothing, I whispered. But here's what you didn't know. Nothing doesn't build a $45 million empire from silence. Nothing doesn't turn pain into power. Nothing doesn't get back up and sign her name where yours used to be. He swallowed hard. And for once he had no words. I took a step back and looked him in the eye. You didn't break me. You just made room for me to become something you couldn't control. I turned then, walked slowly back up the stone path. I didn't look back. Not once. The gate didn't buzz as he followed. He never did. Inside, the villa smelled of lavender and lemon bread. The glass walls glowed with late morning light. I walked into the kitchen, placed the flowers in a crystal vase, and trimmed the stems with a small pair of silver scissors. As I stood there, the sun warming the side of my face, I thought about all the years I gave to a man who only knew how to subtract from people, and then I thought about everything I'd built when he finally stopped trying. There would be no dramatic court battle, no social media announcement, no viral clip of a tearful confrontation, only this, a quiet final boundary. A woman who once begged for permission, now giving none. I set the vase on the kitchen island, straightened the petals and smiled. If you've ever been told you were nothing, I hope this story reminds you of just how powerful your silence, your healing, and your rise can be. Have you ever walked away from someone who never thought you would? Tell me below, what was the moment you finally chose yourself? Let's talk in the comments. Your voice matters here.